So hello, everyone. Welcome to Thriving Together, a panel hosted by AMHC Waves team. So my name is Kimmy Wu. I am currently the acting director of the AMHC Waves team. I'm an intern therapist here in Washington, D.C., and I'm also currently a counseling graduate student at Northwestern University.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn. I'm located in Irvine, California. I'm originally from the Bay Area, visiting the spring break. I'm currently doing my PhD at UC Irvine, studying emotion, and hoping to continue doing research and supporting Asian mental health. So nice to meet everyone. Very excited for today's session. Okay, then.
Yeah, so what is Waves? So the purpose of the AMHC Waves team really, we are a group of people who are on a mission to destigmatize mental health within the AAPI community by providing a safe and brave space for individuals to discuss and learn about all things mental health and wellness. So we host events such as roundtables, guest speaker workshops, panels such as this one, and eventually some in-person meetups. So look out for that. And another thing, we would ask all the attendees to mute themselves while we are doing this panel. We do have a Q&A portion at the end where you can feel free to unmute and ask questions.
So just as we're getting started, we wanted to go over a few group norms just to kind of set up the space. Just like come as we are, take what we need, treat each other with dignity and respect, assume good intention and meet others where they are, learn from each other and share when appropriate, de-identify if we're sharing stories or anyone's experiences, and treating ourselves with empathy, compassion, and kindness. As a small note, this event is not a replacement for therapy. It may include content or language that might feel triggering. We acknowledge that everyone has different life experiences, but if at any point you are feeling kind of upset or disturbed, we ask that you can also take measures to keep yourself safe.
So I'm going to go ahead and start by introducing our panelists. So the first one up is Miss Christy Kim. So Christy is a second generation Korean American psychotherapist in New York City who works alongside individuals and couples to cultivate curiosity, compassion, and authenticity. In addition to her therapeutic work, Christy is the co-founder of Bridges Mental Health, which connects Asian Pacific Islanders, South Asian Americans with culturally affirming mental health care and build community for professionals who serve them. Along with the Bridges team, Christy co-hosts Beyond the Couch, a weekly podcast exploring Asian American mental health and identity. And there is her Instagram handle with Bridges Mental Health.
Hi, everyone. Realize I'm matching, I'm wearing teal again as in my headshot photo, but I'm so glad to be here.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce Claudia Nguyen. So Claudia is a Vietnamese American licensed professional counselor and clinical supervisor in the District of Columbia, as well as nationally certified counselor. She's an EMDR trained and uses trauma-informed practices, integrating Buddhist philosophy in clinical work to focus on experiential healing and strengthening of the mind-body connection. As an experienced registered yoga teacher and yoga teacher trainer, she utilizes her training in vinyasa in prenatal yoga and meditative practices to inform her holistic approach to mindfulness. So welcome, Claudia.
I also will add for Claudia, over the course of the past 10 years, she has taught over 300 yoga teachers and facilitated wellness trainings for organizations like Blue Cross Blue Shield, and with us, the Asian Mental Health Collective, and at Georgetown University's School of Business. So
amazing.
So next is Dr. Jennifer Young. Jen is a licensed psychologist in Washington, D.C. and California. While she serves in the public sector for the past 10 years in her early and mid-career, she is currently in private practice full-time. She also serves in a consultative capacity as a clinical associate for a humanitarian aid organization that supports the mental health of aid workers worldwide. The majority of her clients identify as people of color, and of that, the majority identifies as being a part of the global Asian diaspora. Dr. Young also served as a co-chair of the International Task Force, Division 35's Section 5, Psychology of Asian Pacific American Women of the American Psychological Association. I apologize, y'all. There's a lot of.
I didn't realize it was going to be such a tongue twister. I'm so happy to be here with everyone. Happy Saturday.
So I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Maher Raza. So Maher is an OB-GYN doctor in Southern California. She was born and raised in Pakistan and moved to California at the age of 16. As an immigrant, she has navigated the drastic lifestyle changes and moving to college in the face of South Asian parents' inertia of children moving out. She hopes to empower women through each patient encounter and equip our communities to provide resources to our children to achieve demanding careers such as medicine and healthcare policy. Welcome, Maher.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Welcome to the panel.
And last but not least, we have Dr. Stacey Leetom. So Stacey is an assistant professor of counseling education at Cleveland State University, a licensed professional clinical counselor and supervisor, as well as a clinical sexologist with the American Board of Sexology. Dr. Leetom is a member of the Forbes Health Advisory Board and a nationally recognized content expert on topics related to mental health and sexual well-being, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, as well as Asian and Pacific Islander American concerns. He is an immigrant and identify as a Chinese and Filipino American.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yay.
Okay. So just like a general overview of today's objectives for having our wellness panel. We did want to explore women's mental health and the wellness from an intersectional framework from women of all walks of life and experiences, highlight specific mental health and wellness concerns that impact AAPI women. And then.
Yes. So, as we kind of worked on the programming, we felt that, when it comes to speaking about the AAPI woman experience, we really can't not bring up all the stereotypes that, are very much in our faces all the time and, impacts how we are viewed by society and how we interact with people. So some of the, stereotypes that are top of mind are, China dolls and Lotus Blossom, which kind of paints us as, submissive, delicate, and overly emotional beings. The dragon lady, someone who is deceitful, domineering, mysterious, and sexually alluring. And lastly, the tiger mom, so someone who is harsh, demanding, controlling, and emotionally unsupportive. And we'll definitely, discuss a little bit more about these stereotypes and how they kind of impact our, personal and professional experiences.
Okay, so I think without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start with the panel. So Kimi and I have kind of developed a set of questions to ask the panelists, and some of these are based off of some of the questions that you all had put in the registration. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so we can see everyone here. So I think the first question is for all of our panelists. If you could share a little bit about your background, why this topic is important to you, and what do you hope attendees will gain from this panel?
I can start since I was the first to be introed. I I am a New York-based mental health counselor. I primarily work with a lot of Asian identified women and multicultural couples. And I think that my experience, especially being second generation Korean American, is a big part of my being here, my interest in our identities, but it was also a big part of my interest in being a therapist at all, of just how my early experience in my family life, my family of origin influenced like constantly thinking about relationships and the expectations we have in our family life, and then how that impacts how we view emotions and navigate the world in every way. But especially around women's wellness, I so firmly believe that like if a woman is taking good care of herself or is feeling more connected to her own voice, it benefits everyone around her. And so I feel like this will not only benefit, you know, women's experiences or relationships with themselves, but the larger collective, the community that we're all a part of as well.
I can hop in and kind of share. So hi y'all, again, I'm Claudia Wynn. And similarly to what Christy shared, I feel like a lot of my own personal experiences kind of have led me to recognize how important this topic is. For me, one of the biggest things that I feel like is a challenge is wellness is so often talked about in this elusive way that is so everywhere. Everyone says, be well, take care of yourself, practice self-care, and there's so much that's implied within those very simple statements, but no one really talks about what it means and how much it may take in terms of setting boundaries, barriers, what that looks like. And so I'm really glad to be here today to talk about this topic. So if we start to demystify what the process can be like and share that it's not just as simple as, you know, take some time for yourself, or, you know, make sure you're well. And so part of what I am excited to be here with is just to hear the stories, to connect with one another, and maybe take down the idea that it's a simple kind of thing that we all should already have figured out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I can talk a little bit. So I'm originally from Pakistan and I moved here when I was 16. So like my background and I guess I was raised in Pakistan, but so I have a lot of that ingrained in me. But you know, even after we moved here, our families kind of keep those values and expectations from us, and then we're kind of like trying to balance being here in America, trying to kind of achieve those things, whereas like, you know, kind of what I talked about in my bio, that we went for college like in the same town. We continued to live at home for long periods of time. So South Asian families like stay together basically until you're married. And then if you're a guy, you still kind of keep your family with you. So it was very different to be like, I'm going to go to college and I'm actually going to move out. And that was kind of like too much of a shock for my parents. And so I, you know, I've grown up in that and I've tried to balance all of that. The one reason I was kind of interested in this panel specifically, because it's talking about Asian American women, and there's already like that triple bind that women have to kind of aspire towards, where you're, you know, good at your, like, actually no, best in your career, like the best homemaker, and then the hottest woman out there. And so like that triple bind already, you know, and I don't even think that I learned a lot of that in college and, you know, whatever. And I was trying to achieve my things during med school, and I had everyone around me like really, really supportive. It wasn't until like I was actually a mom that I really experienced that guilt and that really being pulled in all directions and not being able to achieve any of this. So you know, that plays into our wellness significantly because of what our I guess what's built into us and what our expectation is of ourselves in those scenarios. So, you know, you're not just a homemaker, you're not just a mom, and you're not just a professional, you're all these three things. And I have found that, after many fights and a lot of trying to work through issues, we've gotten to a point with my husband and myself that we're very supportive of each other. And, whether it comes to housework or family, there's a lot that he does that makes it so that I can do all of those things. He can cook dinner while I work out or play with my child. And when I worked like 80-hour weeks, like, 6-7 days a week at a time, and I worked 24-hour shifts, there was like a lot of guilt. But now that I'm out of there, and he, all he did was he said he was supportive, like he understood, and he couldn't do anything to change my guilt, but he just told me that he understood, and that made a huge difference to my wellness. So I just wanted to be here to be able to share my experiences and how I've kind of worked through this triple bind and the different issues that I continue to encounter.
Love that. I'm going to hop in because I can relate. I think a lot of us probably can relate to a lot of what you shared. So I'm Jen. My given Chinese name is actually Tianluo. I never share that in public spaces, and I'm trying to become, more better able to share that, more comfortable with it, because it was something that carried so much shame for me growing up here in the United States. My mom gave me the name Jennifer because it was like the most common name in the 80s, and it was going to help me fit in, apparently. But let me just introduce a little bit about myself. So I consider myself a 1.5 generation Asian American. I was more specifically, I was born in Taiwan, and I moved to the United States when I was 2. So it's just like a little itty baby. So I'm an 80s kid, a 90s adolescent. And I think I knew I wanted to be a psychologist even before I knew what the word psychology or counselor was. And it just was not a profession in my family, right? That was never going to happen for me. My dad wanted me to be a lawyer. They had all these ideas and expectations, for my future. And so when I see this topic about why it's, how our background is related to the topic of women's wellness. When I think of women's wellness specifically for Asian Pacific women or females, I can't help but think of the word liberation. Whatever that means for us, liberating ourselves from expectations, roles, or maybe liberating ourselves from other people's expectations of our liberation. So that's a little bit meta, right? It's like if we choose to be in a gender normed role, that is our choice. That's like what feminism is about. And so really why this topic is important to me is because I'd love to see more of us thrive, not just survive, but really, really thrive.
I love that. And I have some sort of overlapping themes with what everyone has shared thus far. So, hi, folks. I'm Stacy. I'm so excited to share this brave space with you. And similar to what Meher shared, I'm also a mother and have experienced just the challenge of balancing these intersectional identities as a parent, as a professor, as a business owner, as a clinician, as a person, as a partner, as a friend, as a sibling. It is challenging, and it does weigh on our mental health. I also identify with Dr. Jennifer. I'm a 1.5 generation kid as well, who also moved to the US at the young age of 2 years old. And I joined this panel because I think it just is so important for us to carve out space for who we are and what our needs are as cultural, sexual beings, ethnic beings, who have a lot of history and whose stories are worthy of being shared and are worthy of being heard.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing and for, really modeling this vulnerability for the space. And, I can't help but emphasize once again how excited and how honored that, I get to share this space with you all. I guess, for our next question, how have you yourself approached women's wellness and navigated your own role as a woman, i.e., as a mother, daughter, sister, and, just as an Asian American woman in society as a whole? Feel free to jump in, anyone.
So I can tell you that I have been very intentional um, in deconstructing and challenging the historical expectations of what professionalism looks like as a mother. I think when you are in a workplace setting, whether you're presenting at a conference or you're in academia or you're in a private practice setting, or maybe even you're a grad student, people expect you to work as though you don't have children, and they expect you to raise children as though you don't work. And so I have taken upon myself, and Claudia can speak to this, when I did multiple presentations on the national level in Georgia earlier last year for the National Board for Certified Counselors, I wore my baby. I fully wore my baby for all four of my 90-minute presentations. And I think it was pretty shocking for folks to see that, well, because the one I was talking about kink, and there's a baby strapped to my chest, but there, other ones about research. And for me, it was just, I wanted to be intentional in bringing my whole self into the space and role model how that vulnerability can look, so that there is space for this new, kind of vulnerability in different kinds of settings.
I remember that conference so well. I was there and I witnessed it, so I can confirm that it happened, and it was fantastic. I guess for me, my journey in navigating the different roles that I've kind of been in and inhabit has been a journey. I would say if you were to talk to me maybe 10 years ago, I had a much more everything all the time, all at once. And so I embodied, not only my role as a fantastic sister, but also wise auntie and, a student, an educator, a professional, but also really chill, down to earth person. And I tried to embrace all the many roles at once, which, as folks might imagine, is really hard to do because some of them seemingly given some of society's expectations, or even the ones that I was putting on it, were somewhat conflicting. And there are days when I wasn't feeling the professional self. Like I just was sick of certain kind of norms and or kind of things that were unspoken in certain environments. And so there were times when I just didn't want to have to give into that. Other parts of me felt more vibrant and real in the moment. And so it's been a journey where I've shifted to embracing what actually comes up for me in the moment and not denying myself that space. So it could be like if I'm feeling really kind of open and chill, I mean, certainly I will keep in mind the context that I'm in, but also is there space for me to be my actual self with clients, with students, with peers, with colleagues in a way that feels natural and it's not performative in any way, because I found that the times when I am performing to kind of be in a space, whether I'm actually aware of I'm performing or not, it just was kind of intuitive. It took so much energy from me, and I ended up resenting being in certain spaces, even though they were so meaningful to me. And so for me, the roles, and how I approach it, it's really a moment to moment, like, where am I at? What am I feeling in this moment? Can I really own that and let myself have permission to embody it fully while staying present to what's going on? So that way it's not denying myself who I am.
Yeah, I'm kind of hearing this theme of, learning, unlearning, and then also permitting yourself to be wholly and authentically yourself, in the spaces that you occupy. And, I find that is exactly, at least to me, what liberation feels like and sounds like.
I think in my role, I'd have to start with where my mom's version of womanhood and how much she's led an example for me in the messiness, in the messiness and in the power that she's created for herself. But I was so lucky in that when I was growing up, she was able to hold a lot of conversations with me about what her experience was as a woman, being a wife, navigating expectations from in-laws. And because I'm a second generation, I was born in Chicago. And so a lot of my understanding of traditional gender roles came through what she would tell me or her experiences that led to a lot of pain or led to a lot of stress or difficulty or isolation for her. And I think because I was able to witness that to some degree, in some view, I might have had a bit of a leg up because she really supported my independence. But in a lot of other ways, I was very mindful about how people saw me. I've really struggled with perfectionism and very much feeling like that sense of performance, like we've talked about a bit already. But I think the way that I navigated it, aside from those conversations with my mom, is mostly through isolation. Like throughout my teens or college years, it felt like a lot of the things that I was genuinely thinking about or feeling or going or curious about, kind of just, I kept it internal. And in a lot of friendships, if they asked me what was going on in my life, I would almost blank out. I kind of even felt like a bit paralyzed, like, I don't know how to respond. I just know how to interact if I'm useful to you. So I'll ask you a question. And I consistently pushed it back on other people. And I, over time, just like felt myself drifting. And I think that it's still something that I wrestle with in terms of like how much space to take up and having to intentionally share things about myself so that I am more fully in the spaces that I show up in. But it comes with a lot of just like tolerating anxiety, like tolerating if people think that I'm saying something that sounds dumb or if they're having judgments about me, and trusting that I think a lot of the strength that my mom has given me, that's kind of supporting the idea that there's some value there, that my voice is really powerful even through all of the messiness. So there's been a lot of I would say like relational, like family support through my mom's example and her ability to hold that work with me. But also my now having to like own it for myself and bring it into my own communities and see how it feels when, she's not there. She's just the voice that's coming up in my heart.
I'll jump in. I've had a little bit of a different experience than you, Christy. I like your experience. I want that one. I'll speak specifically to the role of being like a Chinese daughter, because that one has been so difficult for me. I feel like I can sum my journey up with saying I either had to choose myself or lose myself. And, so much of what I was taught, and maybe some of us can relate to this, is that, we put others before ourselves, especially family. We're sort of, ingrained, not all of us, but some of us are ingrained with this idea that we look to help others before we help ourselves. In fact, helping ourselves might be seen as selfish. And so wellness, my God, like thinking about wellness and self-care was just foreign to me when I was first learning about these concepts. And it came to a head when I thought, I'm either going to keep doing what my family expects of me, and I'm going to face some consequences, or I'm going to have to really know who I am and do what's best for me and hope that they can get on board. Like just fingers crossed and a candle lit, that they can get on board. And in all honesty, there is an aspect of a family relationship where they haven't accepted my choices. And a lot of my relatives, though, over time have come to accept my choices, especially when it came to choosing to be a psychologist. Now, some of them express, how proud they are of me and the fact that I can get paid just to sit and talk to people, because that's how they still see it. So, it's not for everyone to choose yourself or have to lose yourself, but for me, it definitely was.
My wellness, well, I'm still struggling with a lot of aspects of different I guess being a mom, being a wife, being just a South Asian daughter. I just recently moved back from Michigan. So while we were in Michigan, we were just on our own, but coming back to California, we now have his family here and my family here. And, our families expect us to be there whenever they're requesting us to be there. And initially, I kind of, was like, well, I want to be with my family. And I feel like I've been away for so long and I haven't been helpful for so long. And I haven't been able to even, remotely financially support them because I haven't had the financial support to support them before. So I want to be there in like every way. But then that leads to losing time with myself, losing time with my partner, and and was causing a lot of friction between myself and my partner. And so setting boundaries was one way to create wellness for myself and to be able to I guess work on my relationship with my partner. I am still struggling with my partner, but that's just something that we are learning because we are in a new environment and we still are trying to figure out what we are when we have a kid. Because so just also taking the time to be very intentional with my time with him. But having family around in that sense really helps us because for the past year and a half while we were in Michigan with a kid, it was just all kid time. It was always about the baby. There was literally no time for Richie and myself. But now my mother-in-law can watch him, my mom can watch him. And so we've been very intentional about taking out that time and spending some time with each other, but also like lunches. We have lunches now. I never had lunches before, but I have lunch. And so when have lunch, like on Thursdays and on Mondays, I'm close to him and we'll actually have lunch together. And I feel like I am just dating him. I'm going out with him and it really helps me. So yeah, those are some of the ways. And accepting the chaos. I would try so hard. So I took a couple months off before I started my job here, and I didn't put my kid in daycare because he'd been in daycare since he was like 3 months old. So again, mom guilt. So I wanted to be like, I'm going to be your full-time parent for the next couple of months, but you know what? I'm not made to be a full-time parent, period. I yield. But I would try to, create activities, all these things that I see on Instagram and make him do it. But he doesn't want to do it. That's not what he wants to do. Like he wants to take the marker and he just wants to write all over. He wants to take it and he wants to stick all the stickers on me. And that's what he wants to do. And you can't make him make a gingerbread house. You can give him all the things and just laugh at how many candies he's eating while he's smearing things everywhere. So, I mean, I have accepted the chaos and that makes it so I am not as aggressive towards my child and I'm not in tears at the end of trying to do something with him, but I actually just enjoy time with him. And then, if I give into a little bit of it as he gets older, he'll actually follow in the next minute. He'll be like, okay, let me see what you're doing and I want to do that. So, and I realized he was really young and it takes a lot to realize that too. But yeah, so embracing the chaos, setting boundaries, and then being very intentional with my time with my husband.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing a lot of, common theme here where we're all trying to navigate life and figure out the different roles that we take up in our lives and learning how to balance. And, I think to Jen's point, I think there's also this theme of trying to, figure out what is the sweet point as an Asian American person, our collectivist roots, right? What is passed on to us, like that Asian collectivist culture versus being an American as well, where, we kind of embrace this individualism. So, I'm loving hearing all of your personal experiences. And, I really do feel the love that you have for not only the people around you, but also yourself. So thank you all for that. I think Jocelyn, you have the next question.
Yeah, so I think kind of adding on to navigating the different roles and identities that you all have in your lives, we were hoping maybe you could share a little bit about kind of navigating potentially unique intersectional challenges or discrimination. So as Kimmy was mentioning early on when we were having our slides, there's various types of common discrimination or stereotypes that Asian women might encounter. And so, how has your identity informed your experiences? And have you navigated some of those maybe experiences of discrimination? I'm going to go ahead and post in the chat too.
Okay, it's a big question, right? Like, I know I needed to take a breath, even though I prepared to answer this question. I'll go first. So one of the aspects of my identity that I don't often get to share, especially in the US, I'm sorry for the sirens. If it gets too loud, I'll just stop talking and then let someone else go. But one of the identities I don't get to talk about in the US American context too much, because it doesn't seem to matter as much, is my identity as a global citizen. And I say that not just because I've had meaningful life experiences living in different countries, but because I have often felt like I can connect with people and cultures that are not part of my parents' heritage or my own heritage or my own cultures more faster sometimes. It's a very unique experience. And so when I work with, I know we're talking about AAPI females and women, but I see familiar themes no matter where people are in the world when it comes to Asian stereotypes. They don't exist only in the US context. And I'll give you an example. I was working with someone who is an Asian American female who is working out in a country, I won't name which one, but a country in South America, and was dealing with sexual racialized harassment on the daily as soon as they stepped out of their house, because the indigenous women of this country happen to be phenotypically similar to Asian people. And they happen to be sex workers. And not all of that population, right? But the most common sex workers in that country happen to share a very similar phenotype. And, in that context, it's a lot different to think about how to navigate because while there's, definitely like oppression and maybe some hate and violence, and we can talk about the socio-historical context of that experience in and of itself, it's quite different than, having ching-chong noises being made to you when you're walking down the street in DC. So I always think about context when I think about these kinds of incidents, especially when I'm working with people who are, talking about this in therapy, is like we can react and, how we do it, if we consider the context of how we do it, I think that's really important. And I'll just give one more example and then I'll shut up about this. But I was in Mexico recently, pandemic years kind of screwed up my sense of time. But the last time I was in Mexico, I was with a Venezuelan friend, and he kept pulling his eyes when we were hanging out together. And he would laugh and just kind of like pull at his eyes. And to me, growing up in the US, that's like, excuse me, what do you think you're doing? We are about to have some words, right? But in his context, I was literally one of the only people he had engaged in conversation with that have my phenotype. So he's seen Asian people walk around the streets in Mexico, but he's never befriended one. And so in that context, he was doing it almost kind of like in an endearing way, although it felt to me like it was very mocking. So how I'm going to approach this situation is going to be very different than, again, being, called Chinatown when I'm walking somewhere, on the streets in LA, right? So I kind of just think about context as like a really important key factor to dictate how we approach and navigate these stereotypes.
That's given me so much to think about. And I noticeably bristled when I heard the example you shared with your Venezuelan friend. And I so appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that. And for me, I'm trying to find a resolution in how much emotional burden are we expected to carry, knowing the difference between intent and outcome, right? Someone might not intend to hurt our feelings or to engage in a microaggression or to say something that ends up being deeply upsetting, and yet it happens, right? If my 19-month-old baby doesn't intend to drop the egg as he's walking to try and help me in the kitchen, the outcome is still the same. The egg is broken. It can never come back together. And so I share that because I've had kind of similar experiences that I too haven't quite figured out with people that I in my heart know are genuinely well-meaning. Maybe they're past partners or students of mine, or even colleagues that I identify as an ally, because I also believe allies are not a self-given title. We get to, that's a title that is bestowed onto someone in a position of power from a marginalized community. And yet I do still struggle with, okay, even though I know you did not intend to say something harmful, the outcome is still the same. I still feel as though I've been transgressed. And so I don't know that I have an answer for this. I can tell you that what has worked for me is in these moments to just say something like, ouch, or wow. Because what this ends up doing is break the feedback loop that has existed already, where the person has maybe said something similar, made a similar gesture, made a similar joke, and has been reinforced through laughter or not being challenged. And so by just breaking that feedback loop, I'm communicating something that has the meta message of something you've done or said is not copacetic with me, and then it forces them to do their own work and reflect and think, ooh, what was it about what I've done that ended up being quite crummy? So I like to use that, the ouch or the wow, or the and these are all grounded in Sue and Sue's 2019 article on micro interventions, which is his kind of invitation to respond to microaggressions. So if you haven't read that article, it's a very good one. It's also open access, but that's how I've sort of found that I've been able to navigate that without carrying too much, and then inviting folks, if they so choose, to kind of do their own work.
I so love the kind of very brief but powerful statements, ouch or wow. And you're mentioning, Stacey, of the emotional burden, because in an instant when those occurrences happen, I'll speak for myself. I immediately am like, let's go. Like, I'm going to try and approach this. How do I, try to attend to this such that not even for myself in the moment, but that this doesn't happen in the future, that you're not doing this to people like brothers and sisters of mine that, also experience this pain, but maybe aren't in the space to verbalize it, confront it. And it becomes this kind of role that I want to take on in the moment as someone who disrupts that cycle without recognizing in the moment what it really does cost of me. And I think to recognize and also protect ourselves as people who may implicitly be hurt in that moment, be wounded in that space first and foremost, is so crucial. I both love and hate this phrase of like putting on our own oxygen mask first, which I feel like culturally for me doesn't always jive from an Asian household. And in that moment, it's so true that we need to recognize what's going on for us in that space and not take on someone else's process of their own growth just because we happen to be involved in it.
I appreciate you all speaking to a lot of the emotional work. If I think of two examples in my experience, especially as a professional, where I primarily work with a lot of people of color, but I have had clients in my private practice setting where a few like white identified cis men have talked to me about feeling more safe with me because, or feeling generally more safe with an Asian woman. And that's why they might have sought out an Asian therapist. And there were this earlier on in my experience, I really struggled because in some of those moments, I didn't have the courage to fully confront that because I felt a little bit resentful. I was thinking about all of the other times where I was suspicious about, like, personally, if someone liked me because of the ethnicity or because of me. And I felt like, okay, now a client is coming in where I'm specifically supposed to help them move through emotional work and interrogate biases. And in some cases, I often think about the times where I didn't have as much courage or didn't want to fully go there with them because it was hard to be that person to help them do the work about how they felt about people who look like me. And but I also want to ground that with other experiences I've had as a professional or other positions I've had working in community clinic settings or doing work with families in low-income housing, primarily communities of color. And my experience as an Asian woman, or my presentation as an Asian woman, had a lot of privilege where they might not have viewed me as safe either because I held a lot of privilege or was a lot closer to whiteness. And in those moments, they would generally refer to me like as China, or language that was in their culture the easiest way to describe me when I'm a stranger showing up to the home trying to do therapy. But I also had to recognize that, like, they weren't used to seeing someone like me. A lot of times they would ask me questions of like what I'm doing there, assuming that I'm a social worker, like this kind of intrusive role, into these as a reflection of the system. So there are times where I feel like very othered and very self-protective with clients, even just one-on-one in the therapy room. And then times where I know that me entering their home or their community is also something that they might be protecting against me or someone who looks like me. So comes up in so many different ways. But I think I've just had to kind of remember the times where I didn't have as much courage before and let that influence, like, okay, we've held it in before, but now this next time I can dig in a little deeper or recognize, like, let's just make it explicit and talk about how it's feeling as opposed to me kind of isolating or withdrawing in some cases.
You guys have really figured out how to, I guess, navigate some of these instances, and you guys are very eloquent and really can express yourselves. So it's nice to hear how you guys are responding. I feel like I still haven't really gotten a hang of how to do this. Um, I I know I've experienced this before, but because I'm in a new area now that is very affluent, and so is very, very dominantly white, and predominantly the leadership is white, and I now really feel that microaggression and in the workplace. And I know that we have several senior partners that that some of them are, work with the administration very easily, and others that are like, hey, I'm a doctor, I want to practice evidence-based practice, I don't want to just follow things that you may throw at me. I want to advocate for myself and my patients. And OBGYN is a very unique field in that you're constantly advocating for your patients. And those people, if they are a man or white, they're accepted very easily and they get to climb the leadership and they get to be like, oh, you're the favorite doctor or, whatever. And then when they are a woman of color, they're all of a sudden seen as like the troublemaker. She's the troublemaker. Do not follow her. So when I'm coming in as a new grad into this environment, I'm expected to be mentored only by certain people, whereas I identify with somebody completely different. So I see that, and I don't really know how to respond to it right now. So, we have our unofficial mentorship group, and we kind of get our information and that we need from her. But yeah, so, and then I am going to pause for a second because I don't know if my partner's still here. But my partner is white. So hold on one second. You guys can talk about something for a second.
Maybe I'll fill the space for you because
Thank you.
I wanted to share something when I was listening to you talk about the workplaces. When I was dealing with my own racialized trauma as a patient, my EMDR therapist said to me, "It is so important for us to say something when we've been aggressed against or assaulted verbally, right?" And that could be, of course, like what Stacy brought up, like ouch or wow. In the workplace, it is definitely, you could utilize those interventions. But one thing that I really challenged myself to do is speak directly to the person about the exact comment that they made. So, for instance, I can tell you 2 times where they both happened to be white women who made comments about how I look like Sandra Oh, which I love Sandra Oh. I don't think we look alike. I think she might be offended if she ever heard that. Or, it was offensive, right? And I had to talk to them about why, this can be seen as racist and this is really inappropriate to say. And another person who made a comment about Chinese people and how they all seem autistic. It didn't come out quite that way, but that was the message. And I had to take this person aside and sit down with them and say, hey, you know what you said the other day when you said this and that, and it sounded like you were saying this. What did you mean by that? And in one instance, we actually had a very uncomfortable but very nice conversation, and we ended up being closer. I can literally say she's a friend now. In another instance, I lost a friend, and so there are some consequences and painful experiences that we have to grieve when we do take action. And I think that's part of the difficulty and the challenge in deciding and navigating like which battle we're going to fight, because if we fight them all, it's exhausting, right? So it's like kind of knowing which ones are the important ones to you. Are you back, Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay.
What I'm going to talk about is exactly that. So like just in my marriage, I encounter this a lot because he's a white cis man and he grew up in a very affluent area. So his experience of life is very different from mine. And although, he's traveled the world and he understands different cultures and, he's very accepting, he's also makes comments and says things and has perceptions that I can see in certain cases and that bother me. And I've spoken up in so many different situations that and it's caused so much problem between us that it's like, it's become emotionally exhausting to bring those up now. So I'm trying to, I don't know how to do this, but it's like, I have to stop watching certain things in front of him because I just don't want to bring up that conversation at all. Like I just don't want to do it. Whereas I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'm doing it correctly, but if I feel like if he sees me as an ally, he'll actually hear what I'm saying versus me just always being an advocate for this person and that thing and that whatever. You're just, you know, he doesn't get the things that he doesn't get. He's like, you're just basically challenging me in every way. So, and I don't know, it's a huge struggle in our relationship. And I've, you know, whereas, you know, coming from Berkeley, I was a huge activist, and I still am. And I speak on those issues, but I also have to understand that certain people, you know, may not agree, and I have to decide whether I want to take up that conversation right now or not.
I feel like when it comes to having these kinds of conversation, when we have to challenge or confront or broach certain topics that can be uncomfortable, I don't know that there's a right or wrong way to do it. Sometimes it takes so much energy and bravery to really get into the nitty gritty and the nuances of these topics. And sometimes we don't get the result that we want. So, I really appreciate hearing some of you ladies speak about your experience when it comes to, confronting these issues, and, also sharing your experiences with discrimination, because, these are very tough things to talk about oftentimes. But, I guess this kind of leads to our next question. So, I guess as women of color, we also often occupy predominantly white spaces, professionally and, personally. So I'm wondering, could you all share your experiences and potentially any advice on how to navigate these spaces?
I can start.
Go
ahead. No,
I was just going to very quickly kind of share my thought, but please go.
Claudia, I yield.
We're going to go back and forth with this. My immediate response is to know my limit, kind of as I interact with groups. I feel like I may sound like a broken record at this point, but me checking in with myself as to like, am I finding myself having enough? Is this causing more harm and hurt than it is help in certain ways? And then actually seeking out spaces and groups outside. I know for me, and a lot of my graduate school kind of experiences, predominantly, and even undergrad and early education, were predominantly white institutional spaces. And as much as I felt like I was capable of getting the education that I wanted, I never felt the social belonging sense that I got. And so it meant finding those connections elsewhere, whether it was for me through sport and kind of community in that way, or, in higher ed now, finding connections outside of my school, which were not readily available, which added a little bit more kind of intention. I required a lot more intentional kind of activity in seeking those connections, but I found it to be so rewarding because, at the end of the day, sometimes no one really got what was going on for me, especially with a lot of the anti-Asian hate that was happening in the past several years. And rather than having for me to explain to people what that was and have maybe the opportunity after explaining them say like, okay, I think I get it, I could turn to people that I could connect with on the other side of the country in a different field that I haven't spoken to in forever, and just been like probably a slew of emojis, and they just got it. And so for me, it was knowing the spaces that I would turn to for certain things and knowing my limits within certain PWIs.
I love that you shared that example, Claudia, of sort of outsourcing mentorship and outsourcing, those meaningful relationships, because that was very much my experience and continues to be my experience as well. So my primary role is that in academia and research, and so I really have found a lot of meaningful connections from other professors and clinicians at other universities. And that's really what keeps me going. There's a sort of a shared sense of understanding. One need only look at my course evaluations to notice that compared to my white female colleagues, students often make comments about my appearance in ways my white colleagues are not faced with, or, you know, sort of you see comments that are perhaps reminiscent of the tiger mom stereotype, where my classes are the hardest in the program. To be fair, they are, but I think that is exacerbated by the fact that students are surprised that I am very outspoken. I hold them to graduate level standards, and I know that that is often because they are struggling with this challenging of an internalized stereotype about how I'm supposed to be. So there's a lot of research to support this. There's two kinds of racial stereotypes. There's descriptive and prescriptive. And descriptive stereotypes are ones where folks expect people to respond, act, or behave in some certain way. And when folks deviate from descriptive stereotypes, they're often met with like curiosity and surprise, like, oh wow, I didn't know that, XYZ. And then you have prescriptive stereotypes. And prescriptive stereotypes are ones where when someone deviates from this, they're met with anger, resentment, and resistance, emotional resistance. And for Asian Americans, the primary prescriptive stereotype is that we should not be assertive. So when we are assertive in workplace settings, in school settings, in relationships, in the bedroom, folks, they bristle because we're not supposed to be that way. So when we are, it's not met with genuine surprise. It's met with feelings of resentment, anger, and contempt. So knowing that, I think, has given me a lot of power in placing language around this. Kimberly Crenshaw, who developed intersectionality, she posits that until we have a label to name our experiences, that experience remains invisible. And so I shared that with you all. So you have language to understand when you're assertive, when you speak up, and folks bristle back. It's because you're violating the prescriptive stereotype that's grounded in what it means to be Asian American.
I think that's so powerful, Stacey, because I think about the times where I've been in workplaces where my bosses have been white. And even when they have explicitly invited a lot of feedback, invited a lot of like opinions from the staff, including myself, there are times where I noticed at first I was like taken aback that they even asked for feedback from their staff. And then I realized I didn't have an opinion. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think that I could have a thought about like the benefits you're offering or how you're leading supervision or anything like that. Me kind of generally observing a lot of rules and feeling sometimes less comfortable to be fully myself around people with authority roles. I just kind of was like, I'm happy to be here. So whatever new information you're rolling out for us in our work, I'm down for it. But so if anyone kind of relates to that at all, I just encourage the reflection of at least knowing what your opinion is or having something to say, even if we don't actually voice it, and having the people personally in our lives that will help us disentangle that, or at least recognize like, yeah, what your boss said was pretty problematic or really toxic, or they're calling you names or whatever could be coming up in a lot of the work environments that I hear about. At least be able to know and name it privately, personally, and with the people that you trust. If you do the extra step of then bringing it up at risk of retaliation or at risk of the other person not understanding, that's an incredibly brave effort to make. But I just want to underscore the importance of like letting us have the full story on our own, and it doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. So that's something that I've personally had to work with, like realizing that I can have opinions and have the feedback, and it's welcomed in some cases, but even if it's not, I'm still going to have something ready, to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing. I know in the interest of time, I do want to get to the rest of the questions. So I guess, I do want to start with a question directed to Christy, and, of course, everyone else feel free to chime in when you feel comfortable. But could you share a little bit of your personal and professional experiences working with API female clients on addressing, the scarcity mindset, perfectionism, and productivity?
Yes, it's also a big question, as all of these are, but I think that these are some of the most common themes that I see personally in my individual work with folks. And if I was to start, I would think about how much we really carry, especially as Asian American women, and oftentimes what we carry is not necessarily our own, or it's not something that we've taken on since we've been born. A lot of the times we are carrying these intergenerational heavy burdens or pain, or we are taking on the emotions of other people. We're taking on the responsibility of other people's actions, their feelings, their resistance to doing their own reflection or therapeutic work. And I think that it often takes on the form of perfectionism, or that we have to continue to produce, or that we have to have or build financial security to take care of the people around us, not for our own joy or not for our own livelihood. So if there's any piece around recognizing where those things might come from, even if we can't just easily lift it from our chests or from our shoulders, and that there can be a lot of deep release and liberation, as we've talked about earlier, when we see that it might not only be us that has to carry it either. Sometimes we can pull on our ancestors to offer a little bit more support, the people who have wished us well for many generations, not only like the carried feelings that we take on that feel especially heavy from them, but also the kind of healing that can come on from when we connect with other people. So I'm sure you all are working, the other panelists are working with a lot of similar themes, but if there's any kind of just replacing where these feelings are actually coming from to the appropriate people or the appropriate parties, so that we're not just taking on everyone else's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just like percolating on what you shared, Christy, and something that a little different from a mental health perspective, but more the physicality. I'm reminded of when I used to being pandemic, it's kind of sad, but I will reprise soon. I used to teach yoga and often work with folks kind of in their experience in their bodies. And there similarly were like these manifestations of perfectionism, productivity that came through even in a yoga practice, where so often I found folks coming to me afterwards, particularly Asian women actually, who would ask, is my form correct? Can you help me with this? I would like to get to a certain spot. Show me how to handstand. I saw your Instagram pic, and and all of these things were so kind of laden with these expectations, not just kind of from a personal standpoint, but what also was kind of being put out outside. I would talk to them in brief moments, but here, all of these different relationships come through in these requests that they had, just to talk about a simple physical shape in one's body. And all that I want to demonstrate by sharing this is the pervasiveness to which some of these feelings, these concepts and lessons that we've heard over time, how far they can take root without even really recognizing at times. And so I think to give oneself the space to really just allow yourself to show up where you are, even if it is noticing that, wow, there it is again. I'm trying to kind of continue on that productivity, can be so powerful. And I mean, I know it sounds very cliche, but the first step to really recognizing and embracing ourselves. It is about practice, progress over perfection in many ways, was something that I used to say all the time as a yoga teacher. And I think it applies wholly to not just our physical bodies, but also our mental, emotional, and spiritual selves.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really challenging that inner critic voice that keeps telling you I'm not good enough, or if I'm not at a certain level, then I'm less than blank, right? So thank you both for sharing that. Our next question, I'd like to direct to Jen. So I guess in the context of anti-Asian hate crimes and your work with API female clients, what does trauma-informed care and healing look like, or what can it look like?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I was thinking about this, and I can sort of categorize the Asian female clients I work with in two groups, Asian American or Asian international, right? So they're recently arrived on a study work visa or have lived here for just a few years, or people who, maybe have been born here or spent their most of their lives here in the US. And I've seen some denial patterns, like, oh, everyone's fine. I don't ever experience aggression, microaggression. Everyone's so nice in the beginning until we have a few sessions. No, but being serious, there is a pattern of like this denial. And what I've come to realize is when, in fact, there has been experiences of this, it's this shame that comes up that is very uncomfortable. And the only word I can think of is it's a mix of embarrassment and shame that comes up for people when they have to face the fact that they were microaggressed or they were discriminated against or they were passed up for a promotion or any number of things that can happen, because it makes one feel like you're either helpless and you're being subjugated somehow, or you have to do something about this, and I'm not really sure if I'm ready to do something about this. And so that's one side of the spectrum. The other side are people who are astute and acutely aware that this is what's happening, and they're just trying to figure out what to do, right? So most people huddle between like, I know something weird is happening or someone said something, but I'm not really sure if I have it right. Like if I'm seeing it with the right perspective, is this really happening to me? So it's kind of like, I hate to use this term, but like this low key gaslighting of ourselves and our own experiences, and I can understand why that happens, right? Because on the one hand, it's easy, especially when you're in the world of social media, to think, oh, I'm going to be outraged too. And I got to, stand up for myself. But that stuff comes with consequences. And not all of us are ready for that, right? So it's kind of like honoring where you're at, your resources, and what you're willing and able and wanting to do about it. So I think in trauma healing, first, it's really important to explore what's happening, to really make sure that we have an accurate understanding of what's happening. And I think someone said earlier, the importance of naming it, right? That this phenomenon is real, you're not imagining it, and validating that experience and contextualizing it. And I keep coming back to contextualizing it because when in my private practice work, when we talk about being oppressed in all its forms, we inevitably start talking about patriarchy, and no matter what corner of the globe you're from or you live in or you have lived in, there is patriarchy that is socio-historically present. And so it's kind of like a comfortability in acknowledging that and contextualizing that and knowing that you're not imagining it and you're not the only one, and sadly you won't this is going to keep happening, right? So knowing that you have a community of people out there who are also struggling with this and finding the right answers for themselves. The right answer isn't always on a post in social media for you, right? The right answer comes with time and careful reflection and being with someone who understands all the nuances and variables that are happening in your life that make the challenge yours.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Jen. I'm like shaking. I feel like what you said, I'm having a hard time like really putting my thought into word right now, because I think, in my own experience dealing with, discrimination and also my own clinical work with API clients, I agree. I think there's so much nuance that go into trauma informed care and healing that, you know, I don't think anybody can decide for us, right? Like, I think it's such a personal outlook that needs to, needs a lot of reflection and consideration in terms of our intersectionality. So thank you for sharing that. I'd love to, kind of get to the next question, which is going to be directed to Mahara and Stacy. So sexual wellness is often a topic that, I think we as a people tend to shy away from. So I'm wondering, in your own words, why do you think that is? And how can we begin to engage with each other and to start having more dialogues about these topics?
So I think that Stacey will have a different response in terms of being a sex therapist, because I do a lot of referrals to sex therapists. But I think that it starts with, because we come from a culture where, I mean, sex is just so many different things in our culture, but a lot of it is very secretive, very not talked about. I think that creating a space where you are able to openly talk about this, and just like going to your gynecologist and mentioning this, um, because you know that your gynecologist is not going to share this information. They are legally not allowed to share this information, but they can provide you with the resources and the help that you may need. But it's hard, because I have patients, that when you first meet them, they're very standoffish. So you kind of have to gain their confidence and use the trauma informed care to be like, 1 in 6 women are abused. And it's part of like my, when I'm gathering their history and physical, off the bat, is like, because a pelvic exam is a very intimate exam, and your experience in the past definitely impacts how you are going to experience this exam right now. So, just validating that it's actually more common that you think. 1 in 6 women have experienced sexual abuse. Have you ever been touched inappropriately or experienced sexual abuse? And they may not convey it the first time, but the next time, even if you don't ask specifically about it, you may ask something in relation to it. Patients do bring it up, and when patients have more confidence in you, they will be like, actually, I wanted to talk about, that, like, a patient will come in for menstrual bleeding issues, and that's what it says on our chart. That's what they, so I come in, okay, I'm like, oh, what do you want to talk about today? And they're like, menstrual bleeding. And I'm like, okay. And then I'll go through it. And then I'll be like, and then this impacts your life because it can cause infertility and whatever. And then they'll be in tears. They're like, actually, I'm here because of infertility. So I know this is completely tangent from the sexual health topic, but, it's a lot of gaining their confidence. But I always encourage, women that I see that have daughters to be like, they may not be able to express it to their families, they may not be able to express it to their partners or their friends, but to just bring it up with their gynecologist can help them talk through these issues. We jokingly call ourselves gynecology, because we do a lot of psychology and psychiatry in our specialty. But I've worked with specific female sexual dysfunction uh, physicians that have given me a bunch of different resources on how to specifically address, like, decreased libido, or decreased different types of orgasmic disorders, or but then there's like just the normal, which is, I don't want to call it normal. I want to say it's common, but it's not normal, which is what I expressed to my postpartum and my patients that have been through something, whether it's a divorce or this is the first time they're sexually active. There's different nuances to that. So it's common, it's not normal. And that's what I want to express to them. Like, sex should never be painful. It's not normal. So, you may experience these things because you're in this stage of your life, but it's common. So I want you to come and tell me, because I hear and see this a lot. But it's not normal. So I want to be able to help you. So I think that one of the spaces everyone has is a gynecologist, because you can express those very personal issues to your gynecologist. And I always tell them, a gynecologist is like a therapist. Your relationship to them matters a lot, and you may not vibe with one, and I will not take offense if you go and see a different gynecologist, but I want you to find somebody that you can really work with. Stacy.
Okay, I'm gonna really try and condense my thoughts. Before I start, I just want to share a funny experience that I had, because my first gynecologist was a Chinese man named Dr. Su, and he was my mom's gynecologist as well. And I'll never forget, because we were very insular as a community. So I'm Filipina and Chinese, and so of course we're gonna go and give business to the Chinese or Filipino gynecologist. And so the first time I met my gynecologist, he's already down there, I'm nervous. He's like under the, I don't know what you call like a tarp essentially. And the first thing he says, "Oh, Stacy, it's nice to meet you. You look just like your mom." And I go, "Which part?" I'm like, "Which part of me looks like my mom?" I think about that a lot. Anyway, he's a lovely man. But so the question is about sexual health, and why is it that we don't talk about that as Asian American women? And I think that to be able to really effectively contextualize the impact of sexual shame at the intersection of gender, sexual identities, and being Asian American women, we have to go back to history. We have to go back and contextualize this, to realize that Asian bodies have been historically contextualized into colonial, historical, and objectified meanings. And so even as back as 1875, one of the first acts that was specifically targeting Asian women was called the Page Act. And this prohibited the immigration of Asian women for sex trafficking purposes, but also for quote unquote lewd and immoral purposes. The underlying meta message was that the only reason why Asian, predominantly Chinese immigrant women would come to the US was because they were sex workers. So moving forward, even into World War II, we have the presence of comfort women. Over 200,000 women from China, Korea, and the Philippines were trafficked and abducted so that they could serve sexual purposes for American men and Japanese men. And then also later, this sex trafficking continued into Vietnam and into the Korean Wars. 80% of comfort workers 80% of comfort women were Korean women, and only 10% of comfort women ended up surviving past World War II. So what does this mean? Like, why would I share this information with you to talk about how from 1875 all the way until the end of World War II, Asian women's bodies have been colonized and colonialized? The reason why I share this is because that means for 3 generations of American men, the first time they interact with an Asian woman, they're interacting with us through the lens of us being submissive, subservient sex objects. And that is where the sexual scripts grounded in shame come from. The first time many of us experience who we are as sexual beings, as Asian women, something has happened that elicited sexual shame. So the first time I knew that I was someone who would be positioned to have comments about my body was when I was 11 years old. I had just moved to Ohio from Texas, and I was trying to find where to sit on the bus to go to a new school. And a little boy behind me turned around and asked me if my vagina was slanted like my eyes. And I'll never forget it. And this is a story that I know many Asian American women have shared with me. They've also had predominantly white heterosexual boys or men ask them these questions, because through the lens of historical context and colonialism, Asian women have been something to be conquered, to be desired, to be disciplined, and to be submissive. And so I think that we understand the history and context of from where our sexual shame comes, we're better able to connect through storytelling and through raising critical consciousness. So that would be kind of my first step to invite folks to have these conversations. And that would be, your experiences of sexual shame are real and valid. And over time, we can intentionally choose to let those go, or at least turn down the volume on them.
Yeah, I really appreciate Stacey and Maher for sharing a lot and kind of tying back to the idea of these topics are difficult to have among our community. So I really appreciate. Did want to ask a question towards Claudia, and again, other panelists are welcome to chime in. So in your professional and personal work, how have you addressed like conflicting values like self-care, boundary setting, collectivist ideals, and or self-indulgence or selfishness? I think it was like a topic that was brought up earlier when you all were introducing yourselves.
These questions, oh, I feel like we could spend kind of hours and hours together chatting and connecting over them. I'm gonna do my best is what I'm saying right now. So from the get-go, I found that the distinction of kind of my personal and professional self as it relates to this seems really conflated. I personally, I don't know about folks joining us, have a difficult time distinguishing how it shows up in both of these spaces and both of these contexts. What I would say is I see it often, though, in both areas of my life as well. So whenever I give a training on self-care or kind of self-wellness, there is often the chiming in, particularly again from my AAPI kind of sisters and brothers around, well, what happens when that, negates my kind of responsibilities and duties to my family, and or, if that becomes a point of contention because it's viewed as selfishness, we are only focusing on ourselves and what that might mean to the family. And that comes up also professionally. If we want to take time in our professional roles, what that means stepping away from our own kind of families at home and how that also gets viewed negatively. The conflict is real. First and foremost, I want to be very clear. Before I go forward, I think it's so important to just acknowledge that it is something that continues to be a struggle. Now, where I found, at least in my personal journey, it helpful to recognize too is deconstructing the idea that being one way will negate or invalidate another. And I say that because, and I feel like this relates to many other things, but I've found that if I am a strong, driven person, that me taking rest and saying no to something or declining, I then kind of shift my mentality to think that I'm no longer that strong person that's resilient and able to kind of carry things out if I say no, if I share that I need to take time for myself, I need to rest. And it's such a dangerous mentality to think from that perspective of either I am one way or I'm another, because it sets us up for a perpetual performance-driven stereotype and or expectation. And so that's the first and foremost thing. I think by deconstructing that kind of binary perspective of we either are one way or the other, and challenging that narrative can be hugely crucial. I also think unlearning, we've mentioned this earlier, but unlearning what might be unhelpful at this point. I think back to growing up, my parents, kind of to share a story, my parents were heavily invested in my education, where I remember countless nights sitting at the dining room table with my dad going over algebra homework, which he assigned, not, my teachers. And I would do assessments with him, or like different quizzes and such. And I remember one night I got a 97, and he said to me, "Well, what happened to those 3 points?" And I was like, okay. And at the time, what I heard was, I need to be getting hundreds. I need to be careful to not make mistakes. Where, I brought this up with my dad not too long ago, and he shared with me, he's like, "Oh, I just wanted you to actually see, tell me what happened." And he was like, first of all, I don't remember that happening, but then was like, yeah, no, that's fine. And yet it still stuck with me. It's I don't want to kind of share too much about my age, but it's been a long time since that happened. And so unlearning these rhetorics that, may have been in place and may have been well intentioned at a certain point in time. So that way we can be kind of flawed and just beautiful human beings as we are, not trying to live into the ideal. Yeah, I hear myself kind of going a little off track here, but I think in that vein, self-care really is so crucial as to, it's a personal experience as to what will be most caring in the moment, but being honest with yourself as to what that could look like and not comparing it to others' ideals. I think a lot of the times too, there is this idea of what self-care should look like, whether it's very zen, very calm, you're so chill, put together, and that may not be what self-care looks like. For me, it's frantically baking to assert some level of feeling of control for myself in the kitchen, but that is what works for me. Now, I'm not going to say that that works for everyone. I will throw out there that kneading dough at times can be very therapeutic just physically, but that's not to say that everyone's self-care needs to look the same. And that's not to say that your version of self-care is any less, right? And bringing it back to that idea of there's no one way, really truly embracing whatever that looks like for you. And being unapologetic about it too, because this is for you in that way. I'm going to pause there.
I appreciate you sharing that experience about the 3 points. I viscerally can feel the pressure of having to, explain, yeah, you're right. I didn't get those 3 points. Where did they go? It must mean that I'm not good enough. I'm not perfect enough. And, that's kind of my own experience with perfectionism as well. But to your point, Claudia, I think it's so important to, I guess, first of all, recognize what it is that we need in the moment and kind of, create and come up with what self-care needs to be, in order to address those needs in the moment. So I appreciate you sharing that. So I know we're kind of getting close to the end, but we just have a few more questions, so bear with us. So knowing that some of you here, panelists, are in interracial and intercultural partnerships, I'm wondering, can you share how your AAPI identities played a role in your romantic relationships and partnerships?
I'll give it a stab. So I exclusively dated AAPI males in my past, but the person who I call my partner now and who I'm married to is of Greek heritage. And I don't know if my AAPI identity helped me choose him, but I can say that at least when I speak to our relationship, there are a lot of similarities that we have in our cultures. There are differences too, but Greek culture is very collectivistic, and they do have um, you know, uh, for example, extreme respect for your elders as one of their cornerstones of their cultural values. So there are a lot of things that we can relate, and we don't have to explain to each other, and that was really nice. I know that's not always the case for people in interracial relationships. Um, but I can say, and I talked with him before I decided to share this, because we've had difficult times. Excuse me. During the pandemic, especially, difficult conversations around race. There was a period of time when I was experiencing so much street harassment when I was living in Washington, D.C., that I would come home and burst into tears, or, just be angry. And I was angry all the time. And it was really impacting our relationship. And we had numerous conversations. And there were times when I did not feel like he supported me. I think if you asked him, he would say he 100% supported me. But that, as so often is when we are in coupledom, right? Like whether you're in a heterosexual relationship or not, like when we're coupled, we have these different experiences of the same thing, and we really have had to work on communication skills. We went to couples therapy to help us. And I know now that, and I knew this then, I think too, that we might have different words or different experiences to explain the same thing. But what was most important to me at the end of the day is that the partner I lay my head down with every night is on the right side of humanity, right? Like we believe in human rights, women's rights, people's rights, gay rights, trans rights, all of that, right? Like we need to be on the same page when it comes to that. And if not, if we don't believe, exactly the same thing, like we need to be able to create space to have conversations about those, because it's really important when we're talking about authentic and genuine relationship, and it's incredibly difficult.
Thank you for saying that. It is incredibly difficult. I think that I also had not ever dated a white man before. I met my now husband. So it was unique, and my parents obviously were not very supportive initially. I had to kind of set them up to it. But for us, it's very important that your partner is of a Muslim background. But for my parents, what that meant was that he should be, Pakistani, because that's their understanding of what Muslims in Pakistani, and their understanding was, well, your cultural norms will not match up with his, and it's going to be very difficult. So I did the whole matchmaking with trying to meet Pakistani men through my mom. I also had dated Pakistani men when I was, or boys, when I was younger and I was living in Pakistan. And then I had mostly dated African American men when I was living in the US. But I think that what I gained from trying the matchmaking and having dated other people was that when I met my husband, it didn't really matter what race he was. It mattered to me that he was Muslim, but he was a convert, and he, we actually had more similarities because it was like I identified with having very American ways of doing things, and he had very American ways of doing things, and he still understood the Islamic ways and did the Islamic ways. So that was something that was important to me, but it didn't matter that the person was Pakistani, because I didn't identify with, I guess I didn't feel as comfortable with somebody who was Pakistani than somebody who was actually American, because I lived here and I breathed and lived like an American. So that is how I chose my partner. I think that there are still many instances where we don't agree on the same thing, and we're still trying to figure out how to communicate with each other because initially the way that I communicated was not something he was receptive to. And so it was just, we weren't able to have those conversations. But his experience and my experience is still very different. And so we are still trying to create spaces and uh, where we can have these conversations and learning to talk to each other. There's a book called Talk to Me Like Someone You Love, and that's what I've been reading, to be able to have ways to talk to him like I love him regardless, but I also want him to hear my perspective in, whatever different situations. So yeah.
Does anyone else want to jump in? If not, we can definitely move on.
I can jump in. Oh,
Please do.
well, I'll try to keep it brief, but I think one thing that has been really helpful with me and my partner is he comes from a Colombian and Ecuadorian background, and there are a lot of similarities that we share with like how we want to be in relationship with our family. But it's also come up where we've had to kind of be protective for each other with our own families and noticing the biases that come up, where there might be extended families when or extended family members making comments. With the intention likely of love and connection, but still they feel othering on both sides. And part of the partnership that we've practiced is having to, whoever's family it is, taking on that role of protecting the person who's coming into the family and having to articulate how it could come across, how it can feel very isolating for the partner coming in. But one of the helpful things that has allowed us to do that a bit more too is the graciousness of my partner of actually reading a lot of books about Korean history, Korean culture, Asian American experiences. And then it feels like, okay, we have our little bit of safety here and we can make jokes. We can talk about how much we hated being not white growing up together. But it also does involve like recognizing the biases will likely come up with other people in our family as much as we love each other. So that is something that requires a lot of courage, but it can create so much safety within the partnership if you also like take up that protection for your partner, with your family.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That was something that took me a while, but once we moved back, it was a huge thing from my partner to be like, you need to have my back when I'm with your family, And once I did that, he was just so much more comfortable and at ease with my family.
Stacey, I know you wanted to chime in earlier. I'm wondering if you'd still like to contribute.
I want to honor the time. I'll say that I think my experience is maybe quite different than other folks. I think my struggle was my own internalized colonial mentality, and so my partner is white, and I think in the early stages of my ethnic identity development, I really struggled with what does it mean about me that I'm dating someone who's colonized my people and who's colonized my community, and how do I resolve that? And now, understanding similar to what Meher has said is, I love my partner because he sees me and he honors me and he has healed the attachment wounds that I have carried into our relationship from my family of origin. So I feel very blessed to have a securely attached partner who taught me that this relationship is not intended to be transactional. I can accept kindness without having to keep score, and that he has cultivated the space where I can heal and grow and learn to occupy all of the fragmented parts of myself that I growing up thought that I had to embody to be accepted as an Asian American woman. So I honor my partner. I'm very lucky to have the partner that I have. And if anything, I've historically been the problem. But now we're in a much more secure place because I did the work and I went to therapy.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing. I know, with the remaining time, we kind of do want to, start wrapping up the panel portion, but, we'd love to ask all of you to kind of share very briefly, what are some takeaways that you hope that our attendees can, take with them in terms of, how can we continue to build community, solidarity, and maybe dialogue about women's health and wellness for generations before and after us?
I love what Claudia shared about checking in to see what more of the story might have been. I think a lot of the stories that we are impacted by growing up, it's largely how we've made sense of it in our young minds. And if we have the capacity to now, there's so much value in checking in with someone, even if it's years, decades later, and saying, this is how I was raised, or this is like one thing that you said that shifted my whole perspective about myself. Like, what was that for you? Even, especially if that comes up with family members. I know that those can be really high stakes relationships to start off with, but maybe it starts with like very small ways of sharing how you actually feel and letting those kind of small baby steps or slices build over the next several years into having more of a muscle together about saying like, yes, this was actually happening for us. Like there were the first son was favored in a lot of ways, and women are treated in this way. Women are expected to be in standing up and doing all of the cooking, at least in my family's household for a while. So getting to just have a common story about it can really shift a lot of things without actually changing much in the moment.
I echo what Christy just shared, and even whether it's your family, which I had a safe and secure relationship with my dad at this point to be able to share that story. But funny enough, I didn't actually share that story with friends that I felt safe with, loved ones, partners for a very long time. That was a story that I kind of internally kept to myself. And in a way, I isolated kind of that one story and that feeling, that pressure to myself as well. And so sharing our stories are, these impactful moments with people that we feel secure and safe with brave with, just to be held as our full, whole, nuanced selves, I think can be such a transformative experience. And so, I know it takes a leap of kind of faith and or vulnerability in that process, but I would encourage it for the sake of what that may generate in relationship.
And if you don't feel comfortable with sharing with your family and taking that leap, find a doctor that you identify with and share it with them, because it really helps to be validated, or at least get help and resources for the things that you are struggling with. And there are a lot of us out there, and you don't have to go to the male gynecologist that you don't feel comfortable with. You can go to the male or female gynecologist that you do feel comfortable with, or just any doctor. If you identify with your primary care doctor, you'd be surprised how helpful it is, and how much it opens up, like, all the things that you can do to counter those issues. I have patients that have never ever shared or expressed a lot of these things, and they just didn't think that they could get help. And when poked and probed about a lot of these things, because I just ask a lot of questions, when they start opening up, I'm able to help them, and it's life changing. and I know I'm mostly talking about very physical things, but we can always refer you to a psychologist as well.
Okay, I'll. I could see Stacy. Do you want to go? Maybe. Okay, I'll just be. I will try not to be so wordy. I think the takeaway for me is that I hope people know that their story matters. Whatever your story is, it matters, and there's no one single way to deal with any challenge that you face. And there are people out there who can help you. It doesn't have to be in the form of therapy. It could just be finding and building your community and your support system.
I echo that. I think that one way we could continue to build community, solidarity, and dialogues on women's health and wellness is to find places where we are empowered and folks who empower us. And I also think that vulnerability begets vulnerability. So when we share our stories, it gives permission to other folks to do the same. And so that also holds true for being open about mental health. The more open we are about mental health within our families of origin, within our friends, our communities, and our respective spaces, it starts to slowly chip away at the existing stigma about mental health. And so you are more powerful than you think. And I invite you to start having these conversations today.
Well, thank you all so much for all that you've contributed today to our amazing panelists. So I know we're getting very close to our scheduled end time, and I know Jocelyn kind of dropped into chat. We understand if folks need to drop off. We are appreciative of all of you being here. We will stay just for a few minutes. I know Meher, unfortunately do have to leave right at 5 p.m., but we will, welcome some questions from our attendees for any of our panelists. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and be on camera or type your question in the chat box, we will just take a few moments to address these questions. I guess
reading the chat box.
We did a great job. There's no questions. Yeah, so I think, I want to echo, everybody putting in the chat, how appreciative we are for all of the panelists. I guess, I do want to thank everybody for occupying the space. It's such an honor to facilitate this conversation, which is obviously such an important and, important and essential conversation to be had. So I guess in closing, I'm not a writer, but I write. So I kind of wanted to share something that a piece of my own reflection that I wrote last year for International Women's Day. So again, not a writer, I just love to write. So, bear with me. I wrote, my experience of modern womanhood is being told that not only can we have it all, we're also expected to want and be it all. We're empowered to be confident and to claim our rights to take control of our lives. However, this empowerment orbits the social constructs and expectations that make being a modern woman impossibly paradoxical and oxymoronic at times. We're expected to be powerful but likable, strong but vulnerable, independent but reliant, audacious but docile, authentic but reserved, ambitious but compliant. The list goes on. And in no way am I ever saying that we can't embody all of these qualities, but because of the patriarchal nature of our dominant culture, standards for women are ambiguous, malleable, and often very exhausting. So, I think women truly have the incredible ability to be anything they want to be, but the challenge is it's the nuance and figure out what it is that we want. without the implications and influence of our socialized fear of rejection and judgment. So I hope that this may serve as a reminder that, true and genuine liberation can result only from breaking through the self-imposed bounds of the illusion of perfection. So with that, I really want to take this time to celebrate you, every single one of you, your thoughts, your opinions, feelings, choices, and boundaries. And, I celebrate our freedom to strive to be the impossible, and, continue to heal along with each and every one of you. So thank you all attendees and panelists for being here with us. Again, I can't emphasize how much of an honor this is to be able to hold this space for every person here. And, I appreciate your participation and your input. And we will be sending out a follow-up email to all attendees with some additional resources. And we would really appreciate if you would fill out the post-event survey to help us kind of understand your experience of this event and how we can make future events even better for every one of us. So with that, we will stop the recording.